Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all of you. We hope you could enjoy a summer break and that you are fully rested and ready for the last 4 months of the year. Thank you for joining us today. We will start this webinar on midstream projects. Just before we start, actually, on the subject of today, we can share already the subject for the next webinar that will be held on the 30th of October, same time. The subject will be more on oil and gas topic. We'll have see an evolution on the different design and have a look at the first perspective. So it will be a more technical webinar than this one. As usual, you will receive the invitation. As usual, you will receive all the materials, including the video, the slides of today's webinar. So don't take any screenshot. You will have everything. And don't send also, I take this opportunity to say, don't send the chatbot to this meeting. We will kick them out. Let's keep that in between human. And honestly speaking, it doesn't work very well with our French accent. Looking at the agenda of today, we have two main parts. The first one will be Jean that will be explaining what is midstream, what are the, let's say, the particularities for each regions, the new specificities of energy transition and the new regulation and so on. And then we will have a look at the projects itself, where they are, how they evolve through the years, who are the key players, who are the main operators, and so on and so on. As usual, if you have any question at any time, feel free to ask them. You can address them in the chat. We will discuss about the Q&A. We'll have a specific time at the end of the presentation, so we'll address all the question at the end of the presentation. I think we can already start with the first part and with the first introduction of midstream that is a bit, let's say, more complex than it's between up and downstream. Jean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jack. And yes, indeed, it's true that we are often, I would say, overlooking the midstream part, especially in our industry. But I would say in the last few years, it came back to us. And so we made a slide just trying to explain what midstream is in more word than saying it's between upstream and downstream, obviously. And for us, midstream referred to the phase of transportation of energy, and of course, transporting from the production side to the transformation side or usage side. And usually inside midstream, we have different categories. Of course, the first one that pops up to mind is pipeline, and that's why you see on the right of the slide all the type of pipeline that we have from gas to oil, offshore, LNG pipeline, water pipeline as well. But inside those, we are also seeing a lot of, I would say, other way to transport, I would say, energy. One of them is, of course, all the tankers, the oil tankers, the gas tankers, no more and more the hydrogen tankers or ammonia tankers as well. But not to leave aside, but also sometimes people refer to train and trucks, which are a little bit, I would say, to a small scale in terms of usage. So that's why, of course, it's not part of project Smart Explorer because it's not even project, to be honest. And what is quite new into this definition of midstream is also, I would say, coming from the evolution of electrification itself. Because more and more we start to transport electricity directly. I would say we're used from the oil and gas, for example, to transport electricity for offshore assets. But we start to see also a lot of transportation of electricity between countries to, I would say, balance a grid, etc. So it's becoming more and more specific activities, kind of looking, I would say, in terms of organization like pipeline. So it's quite interesting to have a look on that. Also, you see that it's not only oil and gas, it's also energy transition, because energy transition also needs its midstream. And that's why we start to see some project of ammonia terminals, hydrogen terminals, pipeline as well, but also the transportation not only of hydrogen, but also of carbon, for carbon capture and carbon storage as well. We start to see more and more water pipeline, because it came with a scarcity and electrification as it is. So now that we have defined midstream, I think it's quite important to see why midstream is such in a booming time and such in a booming era. And in fact, there is, I would say, two aspect into the boom of midstream. For a long time, midstream was, I would say, an activity taken by the people from upstream, I would say, organization. And now midstream start to become really specific and really its sector on its own. Why? Because I would say on the last 25 years, we have started to develop field, and especially in oil and gas, but energy field, which were not as easy to reach than before. Of course, we have developed, I would say, last century, all the easy field, which were easy to grab, etc., etc. But now all the development of new fields are becoming more and more, I would say, far away areas and remote areas. And the development of those fields come with a real question mark to say, okay, how do we, okay, we can produce the energy there far away, but then how are we going to, I would say, transport this energy to the point where we are going to use it? So that's why I'm going more and more to remote location, far away, etc., deep sea, that this midstream part is becoming quite a subject. The second part, which is participating into this long-term development of midstream, is also globalization. Like all the other industry, globalization is coming to the energy world. And now you could produce energy in Australia, but consuming in Europe or vice versa. You could produce energy at the bottom of Africa to supply in the US. So, of course, for a long time, we try to have the consumption of energy close to its production, but it's no more the case, and it's becoming really a global phenomena. So that's why behind this, the transportation of energy is becoming also quite important. And I mean, the long-term perspective that this midstream part will develop and will grow also in the coming, I would say, 10 or 20 years, because we need to reorganize all these energy schemes. Behind this long-term, or I would say in parallel of this long-term development, there is also a short-term need to adapt our energy grid, I would say, not only electricity grid, but all grid. And I put the picture here of Europe, because as you may have heard that all the pipeline from Russian gas to supply Europe are now coming to a kind of an end. And of course, it doesn't mean that Europe stopped using gas. And in a way that following the beginning of the war in Ukraine, of course, Europe needed to readapt its supply of gas and readapt also its transportation of gas. And that's all we see, I would say, into this long-term perspective, short-term impact of political agenda and I would say crisis, to be honest, asking for project, asking for demand, trying to match the energy map with the political map. And if you came to last webinar, we discussed that in quite an extensive way to explain that today's energy map has to match with the political map. And of course, you need to adjust all the transportation, all the distribution of energy as well. And just if we focus on this case, Europe is quite interesting because you have here on the left the percentage of natural gas from where it was imported. And of course, you see in red here the Russian line, the Russian pipeline, which we're delivering to Europe. And you see that while it was shrinking since 2022, of course, it has been, I would say, replaced by, I would say, all the LNG that Europe could buy in other places. Honestly, I mean, the idea to say, okay, Europe is going to stop buying gas from Russia was a good idea. It's an easy idea, but in terms of execution, it's quite a nightmare. To give you an idea, all those importation of gas from Russia before the war through the gas pipeline were waiting about 25 million tons of LNG. And now it came to 83, and we are going to reach about 104 million tons of LNG import in 2025. And of course, infrastructure to go from 25 million tons of LNG import to 104 in just 4 years is a massive disruption because you need to readapt all the terminals. You need to adapt also all the distribution system because for Europe, all the gas was coming from the east, and most likely it will come now from the shore, so from the western part of Europe. To give you an idea, just to I would say reorganize and replace the supply which was coming from pipeline. 3 years ago, we estimated that it was about 250 LNG tankers that were needed in terms just to match with the volume. And know that we are seeing the consumption of natural gas in Europe going up again. It means that we need even more. And of course, 250 LNG tankers is massive number, and it's a big question mark to where we are going to find them. Also, another problematic for Europe today, that US and Europe, I'm sure you have seen during the holiday, sign an agreement to target the supply of 250 billions US dollar energies from US to Europe. To be honest, in terms of logistics, in terms of number, it's quite impossible to reach. To give you an idea, last year, I mean, US were only exporting about 76 billion of energy, including gas and oil, to Europe. So to rise those figures by a factor of 3, 4, it's hard to imagine, to be honest. But it means that, again, we'll need more infrastructure on the US side, on the European side, if we would like to even approach this kind of number. Okay, so it's quite important to have in mind. Talking about Europe, but not only, because the problematic that we had as European sourcing outside of Russia, of course, Russia had the same problematic in terms of supply, because the question mark for Russia was, okay, to whom are we going to supply our gas and our oil? And Russia was quite quick to assemble what is called the shadow fleet, which is an army of old tankers, mostly acquired from Western companies, quite funnily. And in fact, they were being put in place, especially after the G7 put a price cap on the Russian oil. And the idea was to transport, I would say, under the radar, all the Russian oil to countries where I would say they could do business without being sanctioned. Mostly China, India as well, and also a little bit of Malaysia, etc., etc. And those fleet of tankers and cargos operate outside the Western sanction. What is quite funny that most of the time operate without insurance or GPS system, not to be tracked as well. So it's quite tough. But at the end of the day, this army of tankers weigh between 500 to 700 ships today, which is quite crazy in terms of number when you think about it, because if we look 5 years ago, it was on maybe not even 200. So they have acquired all the tankers that you could find on the planet, and they transport on a daily basis about 4.5 million barrels per day. So it's quite massive. It's a lot of volume that is going around. And again, if you have in mind the situation of Europe trying to source and, of course, buy new tankers to supply Europe, you have on the other side Russia buying, I would say, the other side of the market, buying all the old tankers. So there is a lot of stress and a lot of demand on tanker today. And that's why you see the brokerage price for tankers going to the roof. And that's why you have seen in the past years companies and traders like Vitol, Trafigura making billions every year just by, I would say, allocating their fleet and making the trading of their tankers fleet. So it's quite an important situation we are going to stay on, is that as soon as we see a political order, it put pressure not so much on the production of energy, not so much into the consumption of energy, but it push the mess into the transportation and distribution of energy. And that's why midstream is coming to with a booming, I would say, demand, mostly because of this case. Another part, which is also quite political, I would say, is happening in the Middle East. So it's not only Europe, it's not only US or Russia, but it's also Middle East. Because maybe you have seen, I'm sure you have seen the news, that when US started to make some airstrike on Iran, one of the response from Iran was to make an airstrike in Qatar, Doha. At this point, no big news. It was a small airstrike, nothing crazy. But it was a big wake-up call for all the people in the Gulf. Because if you were in Qatar, and Bahrain, Kuwait, and even UAE, you were under the impression that I would say the US defense airspace was bulletproof, meaning that Iran could not make airstrike to the countries, etc., etc. The problem that by making this airstrike into Qatar US military based, so it's a US based in Qatar, it raises a question about, okay, are we really safe in terms of infrastructure in Qatar, in UAE, in Kuwait, in all those countries, against a strike from Iran? And the answer was they are not. So we have seen 3 projects that are inside the database that came up, I would say, in the following 2 weeks because of this situation. To give you an idea, if you take Oman, Qatar, or Kuwait, each of those countries, they have one principal oil storage for the country. Okay, Oman, they have several, to be honest, but Kuwait and Qatar, they have one big oil storage where you have everything on the same spot. And of course, it's quite weak if you think that you are, I would say, quite sovereign in your country. If with only one strike, Iran can completely destroy your oil and gas infrastructure. And of course, all your midstream. So that's why you have seen Qatar, Oman, and Kuwait raising the flag to say, hey, we're going to launch this project. So they took them out of their, I would say, box from the shelf, because for the one for Qatar, the project was in the box since 2019. And of course, now they are going to execute it as fast as they can, because the idea is to say, okay, we need different sites to make sure that in case of emergency, we can distribute our system. There is also a big question mark about the Strait of Hormuz. So I think we are going to see more and more pipeline project going through Saudi Arabia and UAE, Oman, to make sure that also the exportation of oil and gas in the region can maintain in the case of Iran deciding to, I would say, close down the Strait of Hormuz. So you see, all those political drama, I would say, are having impact on midstream project and having, I would say, on the global landscape as well, but also into national landscape. And I would say we are starting this period where everybody will start to reinvest into their midstream to make sure they have some kind of security or sovereignty around their energy system. All of these to tell you that midstream is going up, to give you some, I would say, feeling about it, about the reasons behind. But also, we wanted to point out that those projects of midstream are changing in terms of requirements. Okay, the request and I would say the expectation from those projects is a bit different, I would say, in the coming year than what it was, I would say, before COVID. The first part is, of course, decarbonation. It has been a mantra into the oil and gas and the entire energy world. But for midstream, what does it mean? There's 2 things that are meant behind and which are really becoming requirements. The first part, and maybe the more important one, is the methane reduction. In fact, if you look, and it's a big problem, the midstream industry, in terms of energy consumption, is really small. Okay, it represents more or less nothing compared to upstream or to downstream. But the problem that it represents a pretty high part of the carbon emission. Okay, for the simple reason of leakage. Okay, if you take a gas pipeline, I think it's quite obvious. But even if you take an oil pipeline, if you take an oil storage, etc., we see a lot of leakage. And the reason behind it that some projects like tankers and pipeline are pretty hard to monitor, to be honest, because of, I would say, the distribution of the system, or I would say the length of the project as well. And also because they are quite passive, meaning that, for example, the storage or into a tanker or pipeline, okay, you don't have visibility into your asset. You don't have people going up and down the pipeline every day to check the condition, etc. So the monitoring is really tough. And sometimes it's not even done. To be honest, it's quite passive or old school assets. And that's why we have a lot of leakage from those assets, way more than, to be honest, we could anticipate. So the solutions are quite clear. First, we need to put in place for all this midstream leakage detection system and repair program. So we start to see a lot of things being done by drone, even by satellite, that can track all the leakage around pipeline road to make sure that there is nothing happening, but also on the tankers themselves. There is also a big push for digitalization as well to monitor what are the change in the data to make sure that there is no leakage, etc. So we can read deep down. But there is also a pragmatic solution to say, okay, we stop using gas pneumatic device and we use air pneumatic device, because of course in the compression we will have less leakage. And there is also for storage tanks a lot of program of vapor recovery unit to make sure that we just don't vent oil and gas all day long just for security reason. So this part is massive. It could decrease by half the total emission of the midstream project. So it's not, I would say, rocket science to make those efforts. And today it's becoming really mandatory. Either it's quite impossible to have either permit or financing on those projects. The second part of this decarbonization is electrification. Electrification, we know it very well. For example, if we work in oil and gas, by, I would say, putting the plug with a cable from the shore to the sea for offshore oil and gas asset, platform, FPSOs, etc., which is quite efficient. The second part behind is also the electrification that we can see, especially with compressors and pumps, to stop using gas turbine, to stop using steam turbine, which works very well, and you can really easily decrease with those two solutions the carbon footprint of many oil and gas projects, so which is quite a requirement as well today. But the last one and last point of this electrification is that today we see more and more connection being done between countries' electrical grid to bring some stability around, I would say, the production of renewable electricity. Following the example of Spain, we tend to realize that, of course, we cannot be only relying on solar or windmill electricity, and by connecting the different grid together, it's helped to stabilize this. Just to give you an idea, I took this graph from the business research company that were, I'm not sure about the figures itself of the total market. I think it's a bit more than that, but it gives an idea about how much the growth of this market could be. And if you are a cable manufacturer, or if we have people from ABB or Siemens in a call, which are making high voltage switch gears, I can tell you that the demand for those products is just piling up. So it's quite interesting to see that it's coming from all over the market, not only the energy market, but in terms of also of infrastructure market. The second trend that we see is hybridization. So sorry for the terrible word, but we are going more and more in midstream project for hybrid solution. Why? Because the lifetime of project midstream is really long. If you take a tanker, most of them, they will live for 30 years, then they might be living even more sometime in different countries. Pipeline, usually oil, gas pipeline, they are there for 60 years. And if they can go up sometime to 100 years, we have seen some example. Oil storage, all again, we have seen them for 30 years, and gas terminal, maybe up to 40 years. And why are they are so long? It's because those midstream projects are of, I would say, a different financial organization than the rest. Those projects cost a lot of capex and cost a little opex, meaning that when you are going to build a pipeline, of course, building up the pipeline costs a hell out of money, but as soon as it's up and running, the compression part, etc., keep it running, and maintenance costs very little, which means that the money which is going to be made by this project is over the long run. Okay, you need to be able to have those projects in place for a long period to make sure that you are going to make money. And that's where the hybrid solution come as it is. Because, of course, we have this short-term vision to say, okay, we still need oil and gas, for example, we still need to adapt our energy system. But what should it be in 20 years? Good question mark. So if you build up yourself a pipeline today and you know that in 20 years it will be no use, then you're not going to do it. Okay, because you are going to lose a lot of money. So that's why we've seen a lot of hybrid. So for example, we have seen different solutions to match this short term with this long term, injecting hydrogen into gas pipeline network as of today, for example, in Germany, to make sure that we can, I would say, increase the lifetime of those assets and those networks. We see also new gas pipeline being built, but being hydrogen ready. Meaning that if in 10 years we want to switch those pipelines to full hydrogen, we can do it. Okay, they can have, those pipeline infrastructure can absorb both. Might need some revamp into the compressing, but okay, it's a novel small cost compared to the infrastructure. But we see also terminals, gas terminals being, I would say, ammonia or e-methanol accepted, and we see also tankers, LNG tankers or oil tankers being hydrogen ready or ammonia ready. So it's quite interesting because it means that the perspective for the midstream are a bit longer, I would say, than the energy cycle itself. So people start to find solution to play in both periods, in today period where we still have a lot of carbon, but also in tomorrow period where we might have, I would say, cleaner energy. And even if it costs more in terms of capex, those projects, by, I would say, opening the lifetime or opening the opportunity to have a long lifetime, those projects, I would say, create more value because you can leverage existing infrastructure, but you can also open your perspective to a longer future for those assets. And it also gives you the possibility to receive public money, which is also a good help to support this capex OPEX problematic. So that's why we're going to see them more and more, even though today, as it is, they don't make really sense. If you think about it in terms of 40 years period, then they start to make a lot of sense. Another problematic and requirement of those midstream projects is the regulation. Okay, we are not big fan of it. I'm sure you are not as well. But here, just to give you an idea, I took the permit application of the Cheniere Midship Pipeline project in US. And in fact, you see the layers of correspondence they need to have with the federal authorities. So in US, with the US government and all the agencies for environment, etc., the White House, the water people, etc., etc., the army also sometimes. Then they need to have correspondence into all the states that are going to cross. So the counties, the state, architectural people, the environmental people, the wildlife people, etc., the water people as well. So it starts to be quite a long list. And then they need to go to the tribal correspondence as well, to the point where just for this project pipeline, the volume 1 of the permit application was 6,000 pages. So it's a lot of lawyers, it's a lot of legal work, and to be honest, a little bit, I mean, compared to the engineering work, it's way more effort from the legal side and lawyer side than the engineering work. And in fact, it's a little bit the case for all the midstream projects. In terms of engineering, it's not, I would say, redone every project. Okay, most of the technology are known for tankers. Most of the technology for pipeline are known for terminal as well. So usually you just select your technology brick and then you are going to add them. But for the permitting, it's a lot of work and it can be crazy work. Best case scenario, for example, for a pipeline can be 2 years if you're in the good region and the project is, I would say, acknowledged by the government, etc. But it can go up to 10 years and sometimes it can completely cancel the project. Also, those midstream projects have a strong opposition from NGOs. We have seen, for example, I'm thinking about ECOP, the East African crude oil pipeline from Total. The project has been stuck, and you have people in France striking and demonstrating for a project which is happening in East Africa. So it's a bit confusing sometimes. But in fact, those projects of midstreams are really impacted by those situations because by essence and by nature, they are transnational, okay? Because you are going to deliver energy from one side of the world to another. So you need to match with export control of your own country, your own state, but also the one on the other side of the project, etc., etc. So it can be a lot of work, it can be a lot of pain. And of course, you need to have this into account when you're working on those projects. That project can be cancelled, can be postponed for 10 years because the government is changing or because of whatever reason. So it's quite complex, but it's also quite rewarding market because if you are used to work in those cycles, of course, normally you can make a lot of money out of it. Now going to the outlook, and Jack, I give you the floor now.
Thanks, Jean. Thanks for this explanation on midstream. There are challenges and the new regulations around it. Let's start with maybe a map of the projects, and we'll see in a second the map here with the projects around the globe. As usual, one green dot is a project, and you see basically we have 4 hubs, 4 different hubs. Europe is being the main active reason, and this is a consumption hub for the reason that we already explained. Everything that is around reshifting, reorganizing the energy around after the Russian invasion. Second consumption hub is Asia for a complete different reason. Here it's totally linked to the consumption and the increase of population, and also the standard of life that increasing in Asia. So there is a higher demand for refined products. So that's directly linked to that. And next to that, we have two, let's say, production hub, which is number one is US, and then followed by Middle East, for the reason again that Jean explained, following what happened with the strike over there. They want to reinforce their infrastructure locally. So we have several midstream projects over there also in Middle East. If we look at the forecast, at the evolution of these projects, of the capex per year, first we see that the impact of the COVID was there, but I would say less than in other sometimes application, and we'll see why, because later. But we see also that since the COVID, it's going up. It's going up also in oil and gas, and then it's being pushed by energy transition. You already heard us said several times that we should say energy addition instead of energy transition. Here it's more than obvious. We moved to a period where we, let's say, was only transporting oil and gas, and now we are transporting oil and gas plus electrons plus CO2 and all the hydrogen, ammonia, and all the variation around it. So this comes on top of the need anyway that we have on oil and gas. If we look at the same graph, but from with the, let's say, the firm figures, we have a similar pattern, and we already have a strong 2025 years already. And you see that the green part is quite high. It's actually happening. It's not remaining on the forecast. I would say that we can have sometimes with some application. I'm thinking about CCUS that is a bit struggling to see the light. In here, these projects are actually moving forward. If we now have a look to the, let's say, country mix or let's say region mix of these projects, as we saw on the map, the first region is actually Europe, and that's the green part on the first graph. One word on Africa that is quite strong on the graph. It's driven by the fact that, as usual in Africa, projects are quite, let's say, high in terms of capex, quite big, quite huge. So naturally, their market share is increasing when you look at the capex, but the number of projects is not that high, I would say. And then when you look at where the FEED are being done and where they are being executed, FEED is mainly done in Europe for the European projects. Then the execution tends to move more to US or to Middle East also, because a lot of Western companies open offices in Middle East initially to let's say, execute local projects. But anyway, as we are looking for engineering hours a bit everywhere, they also do some projects that are sometimes outside of their natural area. If we move, sorry, I missed a slide. If we move now to this slide, which is the evolution of the projects and the carbon and the market mix on these projects, two things are happening. First, the number of projects and the investment are basically doubled since 2018. That's the number one. And the number two thing that you can see that in 2018, the share of Europe was basically nothing. Europe was not existing on the map. In 2022, it completely changed, and that's the first wave of project that we had following the Russia. And I would say that's those were the emergency project, the quick fix solution to shift the production outside of Russia. And then we have a second wave of projects coming in Europe, which is the long-term reorganization of all the supply chain. And this is what we see in the forecast of 2026 and 2028, where we have almost half of the investment being done in Europe. So you see that in not even 10 years, Europe moved from being a dot in the map to being half of the market in these midstream projects. Let's have a look at the key players and who are doing this market. From a global view, will not be a surprise. The red part are the national oil companies, and they are trusting, let's say, the biggest part of the cake. which is quite, I would say, intuitive by the fact that a lot of these projects are quite, let's say, strategic and implies the decision of several governments. So it's quite natural to have these NOCs driving this market. And this is also why one of the reasons why during COVID, this market was a bit less impacted, because we know that during COVID, the NOCs kept investing in these projects. The second actor is the independents, and it's not, let's say, a small part. It's a third of the business being done by them. And quite interestingly, if you do that same graph before COVID, let's say before 2018, you have more or less exactly the same graph that is appearing, give or take few points here and there. So the part of the share of the independents are always been there. Currently, they are quite active in LNG terminals and also in electrification. This is one of the new midstream projects application that we have. Talking about application and having a ranking on what are the main application in midstream, the number one is gas pipeline. That's currently the main activities. It's being boosted by the project that Jean mentioned, that is a pipeline project, is to do a pipeline from Angola to Morocco. We can always discuss about the difficulties or the doubt to have this projects being realized. We can discuss it during the Q&A, but so far it's actually on the map. And if we look at the pipelines projects globally, most of them are in North America or in Africa, driven by these projects. But very interestingly, the second one on the list is electrification, because these are quite high capex consumers projects. And these projects, these kind of projects, electrification started in Europe, and it's still the leading, let's say, region for electrification is still Europe. But now it's moving, or it's gaining momentum, I would say, in Middle East, and we have several projects now in Middle East. Basically, electrification happens on these two corners of the world, and so far nowhere else. We extracted also the ranking of the operators, and here, very interestingly, there is no, let's say, one specialist of operators in the midstream projects. Most of them, they have one project, sometimes two, but most of them have one project. So the ranking is basically defined by the size of the projects that they have in the portfolio. So that's why the first one is again these projects to have the pipeline between Angola and Morocco. Second one, Glenfarne, is actually behind that. It's the Alaska pipeline that has been recently put back on the table. And the third one is electrification projects in Italy done by Terna. And you can go on through the list like this. Basically, the ranking is done like that. But if we look at the engineering side of this question and try to rank who are doing the feed, here the situation is quite different, and there is clearly one major, let's say, one specialist in feed for midstream projects, and that's Worley. And by far, you see that among the projects currently there is 200 billions projects that achieve the feed, and among these 200 billions, 25% of them has been awarded to Worley. So they are by far the specialist of the feed. And then in the second one, you have the, let's say, the consequences of the ranking of application. Second application was electrification, and in that list, when you look at the engineering, Hitachi and Terna are doing electrification. So that's why they appear also quite high in this ranking. Interestingly, if you go on Project Smart Explorer and start to extract who are doing the EPC, the story will be different. You will not have such a specialist like you have currently with the feed. Before moving to the Q&A session, maybe we'll have a short conclusion. Jean, if you can maybe summarize what we explained during this webinar, and then we'll have the questions. So feel free to start shooting them in the discussion. We'll answer them right after the conclusion.
Yes, thank you, Jack. So the first, I would say, takeaway from this webinar, and I hope you already know them, but just to mention them first, midstream projects are more needed now than ever. To be honest, we'll see more and more, and it should have a window of opportunity of let's say 10, 12 years maybe. The design are changing a little bit through electrification, through hybrid system design. But it's also coming with a lot of, I would say, methane retention, or I would say carbon capture solution. Because if you don't have this kind of solution, you're unable to fit in the ESG, into the permit, into the financing. So of course, if you are not passing those 3 orders, it's just impossible to finance those projects. So that's why we are seeing them arriving, but with different solutions, which are today not really making sense, but on the long run, making a lot of value. And knowing that those projects are driven by 3 factors, sometimes one of them, sometimes the 3 of them. First, it's a problem of political security or political sovereignty, like we have in Europe, for example, but also the Russia is having. So the second part, that the energy demand is rising, so you need to transport more energy from different places of the world. So that's why we need to, I would say, grow, our grid of energy in our transportation system. And the second part is that energy transition is also pushing us to use different type of energy. Okay, and it's also important to readapt our energy system to match with our energy need as well. So today, the midstream projects are into this, I would say, equation to say, okay, we need to answer the problematic of today energy need and also the one from the energy of tomorrow. And we are a little bit in between 2 eras here in terms of usage, in terms of emergency. And that's why some of those projects are quite blurry and we don't know if they really fit into the situation. While at the opposite, some are making sense because they fit with the 3 criteria. So here, in that sense, we can play, knowing that Europe is really the home of the feed, as Jack said, while Middle East and US house most of the EPCs. So it's quite interesting as well to see that it's still being done in that sense. And honestly, outside of electrification, all the midstream projects are done by sometimes only one company, or one company is creating to make this midstream project. So it's not really specific to some operators, but some engineering are quite specific and quite niche into this market. So it's few actors that you need to map at the end of the day if you want to work on a pipeline, if you want to work on terminals, etc., etc. Why? For the simple reason that midstream projects are less intensive in terms of engineering and more intensive, I would say, in terms of project management through the permits, through the licensing, through all the legal problematic that you can find. So it's a different momentum that we have compared to upstream and downstream, sorry, but it's quite interesting. And of course, a lot of good opportunities appear also in this market. And knowing that it will grow faster than downstream and upstream, most likely, then it will give you, of course, more opportunity that you can find in the other, I would say, traditional energy business.